flash-business deals.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com.
8:07, Team Hochberg traffic center time, and Jim Telemonte.
Inbound Kennedy traffic, sticky from Harlem to the Bird Circle this morning. It's 55 minutes O'Hare to downtown, 30 from Montrose. New savings, the Express. Outbound 38 minutes for the airport. Edens, 22 minutes like the junction. Outbound 24, inbound Eisenhower. An hour and 6 minutes, 390 to downtown. 55 minutes for Wolf. Outbound 46 minutes to 390. Stevenson, 50 minutes, 355 to the drive. Outbound 38. The Ryan is 30 minutes, 95 to downtown. I-57, 25 minutes, ID to the merge, Mission 423. Northbound Tri-State delays are 95th to 75th. From the Stevenson at 47. That's from Reagan Tollway to the Eisenhower. Northbound Veterans Memorial. Happy Mountain to the Reagan Tollway. That's traffic. I'm Jim Calamonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. Your official Chicagoland weather forecast from the 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center. Breezy, cloudy this morning. Then sun breaks out with clouds for the afternoon. High 38, 15 overnight. Currently 38. Next news at 8:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by The Mortgage Update with Dan Frio. Every Saturday morning at 7 on AM 560, The Answer.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM.
Stories about how suicide has impacted their family life, including most recently the story of Gabriel, that 12-year-old who took his own life in Chicago. Talked to his mom, which the family started a foundation in his honor to try to help combat bullying in K through 12 school systems in part, but really to try to address kids who are demonstrating signs that they are in crisis in a depressive way. And it's just very difficult to get at the heart of the matter of why we've seen this trend upwards in suicide deaths. 50,000 in 2018 alone.
50,000? Which
is, about almost 50% more than automobile accidents. So, significant. And Richard Friedman, piece in the New York Times that we discussed. We've talked to Theodore Dalrymple, a psychologist, on the topic, and others. And it's just difficult to zero in on what the variable is that helps most nearly explain why the rise, what's going on, so that we may have a roadmap for what we should be doing. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Charles Lehman, who's a social issues and policy writer for the Washington Free Beacon. He has written an extensive piece on the topic that is worth discussing as well. Charles, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Let's go to one of the favorite explanations that's offered as suggestive, offered in a friendly way, but not a scientific one. Screen time. It's social media that's the culprit. That's the difference maker. That's the innovation over the last 2 decades that explains this trend upwards. Yet it is not the case according to the actual analyses that have been done. And you make the point, additionally, that if that were the case, then shouldn't we see suicides going up in other developed countries where kids are spending the same amount of time on social media or in front of a screen, and we don't see that happening either. So that seems to be an area that's popular to reference, but doesn't really bear out in terms of study.
Mm-hmm. So I did some other work on this particular issue that I allude to in the article that you're talking about. There's a couple of surveys at the Pew Research Center did where they actually asked teenagers, how do you experience screen usage? How do you experience social media? And what they say is most teens agree that they use screens too much. Most teens have a nuanced view of their experience with social media. They say that it does facilitate sort of worse interactions. It does facilitate bullying, but it also facilitates person-to-person relationships. It helps them form friendships, especially, if you think back to when maybe you went to camp over the summer as a kid, those are relationships that you can preserve much more robustly over social media today. So when you ask kids how they feel about it, they'll say they have a mixed experience. And I think about social media in particular as sort of a platform on which, or a space in which, some of the other trends that may be affecting teen suicidality and teen rates of suicide in particular can be amplified, but it's probably not a driver in and of itself for the reasons that you allude to in addition to that, because we don't see this increase in other developed countries, and because, frankly, what data we have, what research we have on the teen screening link is pretty equivocal at best in suggesting that there's a strong relationship.
Well, what about bullying? I know some people hate that term, but people who are bullied by other classmates online, or shamed, or you're even feeling isolated because you'll go on Facebook and everyone, oh, look, all your friends are at a party, but you weren't invited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, so what we do know is from surveys, if you go look at the surveys distributed by the National Center for Education Statistics, shares of the teenage population that report being bullied and report being cyberbullied have actually declined over the past several years, which isn't totally surprising when you think about sort of the density of anti-bullying messages that surrounds modern kids. They're really told bullying kind of sucks, and they kind of agree with it, which doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It absolutely does, and there are terrible cases where it leads to kids making terrible choices. I think on the other hand, one trend that is relevant, there's a lot of research that indicates that what's talked about as suicide contagion, that if somebody in your community commits suicide, others are more likely to also commit suicide. And it is quite possible that social media propagates that in a way that we don't intend. This is part of why reporting on suicide has to be very cautious, because it's very easy for somebody to read about somebody committing suicide on their social media feed and for that to become more of a possibility to them. There's strong evidence, especially in teenagers, that there's a very real effect that you get clusters because of this.
What about this other data point that you address, the so-called incremental number of added suicides? I say that in quotation marks, over the last 20 years, and the method by which the suicide is carried out. I don't want to get macabre, but maybe there's something here. The majority of that increment, deaths by suffocation. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
is there anything notable about that?
Yeah. So just for, I guess, a little context for your listeners, I look at between 1999 and today. I look at by the method of suicide, what the underlying methods were. Partially to look at the relevance of firearm deaths, and what I find is that things designated as suffocation deaths are actually much more common. So there are any of a number of different potential explanations. We can't really suss out from the data what's going on there. We can speculate a little bit. It may be the case that I suspect some of what is going on there is information propagating about what methods of suicide are more or less, for lack of a better word, comfortable, or at least involve less pain. So carbon dioxide inhalation, for example, is something that people learn how to do, or learn as an option available to them, which reduces the fear of pain associated with death, which may explain why some people are selecting suffocation for that method as compared to death by firearm.
What about deaths of despair, the so-called deaths of despair, middle-aged, working people who don't see a future and are either through addiction or some other means killing themselves?
So I do, and I touch on the concept generally, and I think that there are two sides to that story. There's good sociological evidence that the lives of a particular cohort of primarily white, middle-aged, primarily rural Americans who do not have a college degree have gotten substantially worse over the past 20 years as a function, in no small part, of decision-making about the manufacturing industry in America. And there are lots of different negative indicators for that cohort. And I sort of caution against generalizing from that cohort to the state of American society. More broadly, one of the things that I point to is that all of our other indicators of societal happiness say that we're at one of the happiest points on record. There's not a lot of evidence to suggest that Americans are more lonely than we used to be. Americans put some of the highest levels of economic and also personal competence in the past 40 years. So there are a lot of people who are not despairing, and there are high rates of despairing. There is a particular population whose lives have gotten worse in a particular way, and that's what I think death despair originally refers to. But it's very easy to elide that term, that definition, into an assumption that Americans' lives in general have gotten worse, and I don't think that that's true.
Well,
one other thing
sorry, go ahead. The other thing that you point out, I mean, just to cut right to it, is the suicide rate is only up for people under 30 years old. So, I mean, it's relatively stable across other age cohorts for those sort of death of despair, middle-aged white people in rural areas sort of line of argumentation. What you find in the data is it's only increased for people under 30.
Well, so the suicide rate is up across, and this is a weird nuance, the suicide rate is up across age groups. The rate of what experts call suicidality, which is
contemplating.
Thinking about suicide, is up only among under 30. So what's interesting there is that if those data are correct, and we're not sure they're correct, but if those data are correct, what it means is that among the over 30 population, there are not more people who are suicidal, but among the people who are suicidal, they are more likely to commit suicide, which to me indicates that there may be, again, more knowledge out there about how one would commit suicide, which is concerning and a very different trend from people are more despairing for these exogenous reasons.
Well, is there any gray area between accidental overdoses that are marked as suicides?
There is some. It's possible, and I think there's a big debate about how intentional is any given overdose. But poisonings only account for the remaining fraction of the increase that I alluded to earlier. Poisonings account for something like 9%. So even if you assume that there's some larger share that's involving drugs, it's probably not going to swamp the other two major causes of suicide, which are suffocation and firearm death.
And so, when do we get to a conversation about character formation and how children are being raised, what parents are doing, preparing their child for the road versus trying to prepare the road for their child? Very different approach to parenting, those two choices I presented. When do we get to the loss of faith in America, the bump up the increasing suicide rate to the declining rate of faith and church attendance across different demographics and really across all age demographics? When do we start talking about that in terms of people having a hole in their center that they can't fill through through materialism or through any other means, and so they don't see anything bigger than themselves for consideration?
Yeah, so I think I have two responses there. One is two sort of very data-driven responses. One is that the share of the U.S. population that says that suicide is, and the language in the question is morally permissible. Is it morally permissible to commit suicide? If you're unhappy with your life, is it morally permissible to commit suicide in the event of an illness or if you've dishonored your family? The share that says yes to all of those has been rising over the past 40 years, which means that alone probably didn't cause the sudden spike in 2000, but does mean that in general our culture has become more permissive of and less able to respond negatively to suicidal ideation. People who actually say to themselves, well, maybe I do want to make the choice to commit suicide. We are less well equipped today to say that's not the kind of choice that you should make. We are less able to say your life is worth more than that. We are less able to say you have obligations to others. We are taking away one of our key tools in sort of the fight against people harming themselves in this way by reframing it as something that ultimately is beyond our power to fix and something that can ultimately be a rational choice.
The Death with Dignity movement. The Death with Dignity movement and the laws associated with it. Yeah.
Exactly. And the other point that I want to the big point of the article is basically there's this huge trend. The article is called "The Curious Case of America's Suicide Crisis," And the point of the article is there's this big, insane trend, and we know nothing about it. We have no idea what's going on. There has to be some discrete cause or discrete causes that caused this sudden inversion increase in 2000. And part of what's going on is, if you ask social scientists, they don't have a good idea. The data aren't good enough. And we don't spend a lot of money on suicide research and suicide prevention in the United States by comparison to the magnitude of the problem. So while I agree with you that there's a conversation we've had about how we raise kids and the lessons that we teach them, there's also a conversation we've had about how much we prioritize understanding what's going on. Because if you want to have those informed conversations, not just with your kids, but as part of society, it's important to understand what the major drivers are. We just don't do enough to do that right now.
He is Charles Lehman, social issues and policy writer for the Washington Free Beacon. Check out his piece, The Curious Case of America's Suicide Crisis. Charles, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
It may not be stomach issues.
For me, it's intense gas, or pain, or diarrhea, sometimes all at once, over and over.
I spent years with the symptoms, but could never figure it out.
No matter what I did, they never went away. So I decided to break it down for my doctor and get really specific about my symptoms.
We discovered that exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, or EPI, may be the reason for my stomach issues.
EPI is caused by my pancreas. It leads to diarrhea, gas, bloating, stomach pain, unexplained weight loss, and oily stools. The symptoms just don't go away.
But EPI can show up with even one symptom.
The good news? EPI is manageable.
But to get to the right diagnosis, you have to break it down for your doctor and get specific about the severity of your symptoms.
Visit identifyepi.com to learn more and use the symptom checker to help change the conversation with your doctor. Brought to you by AbbVie.
The weather outside might feel like winter, but if you have school-age kids, you should be thinking about back-to-school season. Specifically, you should be thinking about where you will be sending your kids to school this fall. If you've always felt like you didn't really have a choice to send your kids to a private school because of the cost, then listen up. We want to tell you about halfpriceschools.com. At halfpriceschools.com, you can find local private schools from all over Chicagoland offering vouchers for a full year of tuition at half the price with no catch. Find a school near you, purchase the tuition voucher, prepare to send your child off to school this fall. It's that simple. Halfpriceschools.com has schools located across Chicagoland, including Westminster Christian in Elgin, Christian Liberty Academy in Arlington Heights, Chicago Hope Academy on the west side of the city. Make private school a real option for your family for the first time this year. Don't wait. Many of these vouchers will sell out. Visit halfpriceschools.com today. That's halfpriceschools.com.